do in terms of your religious life, rather than not committing murder, which is covered by civil law or criminal law, if you follow what I mean. But there are some things where the overlap is so great it doesn't really matter. I mean, there's a whole section in the Torah and the books of Moses about how you shouldn't shortchange your neighbour, give justice in dealing with weights and measures and finance and so forth. There are very strict laws in Judaism about how you have to, you're obliged to treat other people justly and fairly, that sort of thing. But of course civil law too overlaps.
Thank you.
As I say, Jews are like other people, only more so.
I just want to come back a little bit to the subject of anti-Semitism, because I was quite surprised when I went to live abroad in Central Europe, in Hungary, how much anti-Semitism there is still in Central and Eastern Europe. As you say, despite the fact through the Holocaust most of the Jews there were killed, the fact that anti-Semitism is still so strong, it's quite a strangely irrational thing. Well, of course it always was irrational, but even more so now. And I get the feeling that in Britain, you can put me right here, that the amount of anti-Semitism seems less in Britain. Maybe I'm wrong. Are we more tolerant and rational here, or am I mistaken?
Abe wants to say something.
Yeah. I was always told, not taught, but I was always told, the origins of anti-Semitism comes from the Roman period when Jesus Christ was crucified, and it was at the behest of the leaders of the Jewish community that Herod obeyed and followed, and the crucifixion of Christ was blamed on the Jews. It was then followed up by what you touched on, Anthony, in your talk, about using the blood of Christian children on the Passover, because one of the stories within the Haggadah is the reason why the angel of death, the last plague of the 10 plagues that were visited on the Egyptians, was the slaying of the firstborn. And the angel of death flew over the Jewish households because they smeared their doorposts, where you put the mezuzah, with the blood of a lamb. And this is part and parcel of the Passover service. So this all comes from the principle of what people believe happened in those very, very far off days, about using the blood of Christian children. And of course it's a complete fallacy, because it was never used and never done. But that's where the origins of anti-Semitism have come from.
I think that would certainly be a very powerful contribution to, if you might, theological anti-Semitism, and possibly the reason why, for generations, Jews in Rome and so on were subjected to conversionist sermons and had to sit. And Easter was a terrible time for them because of the blood libel and so on and so forth. But of course, life isn't totally as simple as that. Other things happen as well, and it gets a bit like you were saying about with Zionism and Judaism, prejudice against, it gets blurred with other things that happen.
Well, it's gone through the ages. Torquemada,
yes.
The Spanish Inquisition.
Yes.
I mean, if you didn't choose to be baptized, and then of course you were put to death, and that was during the Inquisition in the 16th, 17th century.
To go back to what Adrian was saying about things, I think anti-Semitism in Britain, such as it is frequently expressed in a much more genteel. You can't join a golf. No, genteel. You can't join a golf club. That sort of thing. And it's not you can't join. It's not enshrined. But if you happen to have a name like Cohen, you'll never get in. That sort of thing. There's quite a lot of that sort of, if you like, prejudice against, but it's not unique to Jews. Other groups have also experienced similar things. Probably none of you know much Yiddish, but there's a saying in Yiddish, when something happens, you shout out, "Oy vey." Well, there's a story told of this chap who wanted to join the golf club, he changed his name from Cohen to Smith so that he could finally get elected and get in. And after he elected first, he goes for a swim in the club pool, and it's terribly cold. And he jumps in, and he shouts out, "Oy vey!" It's so cold. And then says, "Oh, whatever that means."
Yes, sir.
Just a comment, really. It seems to me that we are fairly tolerant in Britain, and I think we're fairly more tolerant in Birmingham because we do have to live all together, don't we? And that's what makes Birmingham so wonderful, really.
Well, I would agree with that. I personally have suffered nothing whatsoever in any of these sort of situations, and there's a nice little saying that Helen and I like, saying you can always tell a Brummie by the shamrock in his turban.
I think it is true that there are so many groups that have prejudice against them. I mean, it's not all that long ago when women couldn't join golf clubs or go in a bar or whatever. I mean, it's all stupid, isn't it? But so I do think we're talking about prejudice relative to one group, when in fact there is prejudice to a lot of groups. But it's just been a historic. It's been at the top of the pinnacle, if you like. I think there are lots and lots of different prejudices about. When I first went to Australia, I remember there was a massive amount of prejudice against me as an English person. If I'd have been Welsh, Scots,
You bloody pom.
Welsh,
Yes.
Scots and Irish, no problem. But because I was English, I experienced quite strong prejudice at one point.
Well, I worked in Sydney for over a year. Admittedly, it's a long time ago, but I don't recall all that was being mocked about my Pommy accent, but otherwise I didn't have any other difficulties that I can recall. I remember going shopping the first day I was the second day I was in Sydney, and I couldn't understand what the stall keeper was trying to sell, and I heard him saying to his wife, "This couple," me and my late first wife, this couple have got the broadest accents I've ever heard, and we were thinking the same about him. And then a few days later, we went out to dinner somewhere, and there was somebody at the next door table and saying, "Ew," when I said to him, I said to my wife, "I wonder if they come from Birmingham." He overheard, "Yeah, we could. How'd you guess?" So I think there's always something about the other, which, is a foreigner. Eve Arthur Brickerton, that was a joke in Punch some 50 years ago.
But it's rather good that there is this law that has been exercised today, in fact, relative to cultural subgroups. And perhaps this is, a nice opening up and bodes well for the future for all groups.
Let's hope so. My wife actually mentioned one thing to me when I was giving the talk, which I perhaps should have told you all about, just because it's of local interest. When they did the Backs project down in Hurst Street, the restored, for historical reasons, the back-to-backs, one of the houses happened to be a Jewish household, and it's been restored as to how this family lived in the mid-19th century. So if you haven't been round the Backs, it's worth going to see. I mean, it's worth going to see full stop. It's an interesting project. But there is also, specifically, there was a Levy family. He was a schoolmaster, and the Levy family, and his domain has been reconstructed. It's got some Jewish ritual things in it, a candelabra, the menorah, that sort of thing, and it's set up as if it was a Friday night Sabbath supper. It's worth having a look at, just out of pure cultural interest. And it was just sheer chance that one of the houses they preserved happened to have been lived in by this people. We went round it and found it very, very, very interesting.
It was the local ghetto in Birmingham.
Yeah,
Inn Street and
yes,
Street,
where
all the Jewish butchers and all the Jewish
where they used to be.
Shops
Yes,
in the 30s,
yeah,
the 20s and the 30s.
Well, I was born in the 30s. The 20s is before me, Abe.
Well, Wrottesley Street was
Yeah.
the synagogue that broke away from Singers Hill.
Yes, oh yes.
Because they were the more Ashkenazim, and the big shul, the big synagogue, Singers Hill, was known as the English.
The English shul, yes. And the foreigners wanted more their own traditions.
Their own traditions.
Yeah, I understand. And of course, these days we've got the progressive synagogue as well in Bishopsgate Street as well, even more modern. So the gentleman there was.
Yes.
Nobody mind. It seems that the golden rule apply, but the Jews have the same golden rule as most other religions. If that's the case, are the cultural accoutrements that you have, are they going to fade away, or do they wax and wane?
Well, they wax and wane. I mean, it's very difficult to offset. The Birmingham Jewish community has shrunk. When I was a kid, it was probably about 5,000 or 6,000. It's probably down to about 2,500, maybe 3 at the most these days. But it's fluctuated up and down. I mean, there was a great influx of Jews to Birmingham in the 30s, people fleeing from Hitler. And a lot of people left Birmingham when the State of Israel was founded, and many go to London and Manchester. It's very difficult to be certain as to what's going to happen in that sort of way. Things do fluctuate.
Yiddish and klezmer music are undergoing a huge revival now.
Yes, yeah, as my wife just said, the Yiddish language is now being taught quite widely, and klezmer music, which is music of the Jews, is undergoing a great revival. The biggest, fastest growing group of Jews in this country are the very Orthodox, the so-called Haredim, the very Orthodox, which is partly because they don't practice any contraception, and they don't have the television on Friday nights either, so their families expand at a far greater rates than the other. But the biggest growth within Jewish population in Britain is in the very Orthodox. Now, how far that will go, and whether I can't answer, I don't know. But fluctuations is certainly
until it clashes with one of the other groups.
Exactly. Yeah. Then yes, that's correct. It is said if 2 Jews get stranded on a desert island because they're shipwrecked or something, they'll build 3 synagogues: the Orthodox, the Progressive, and the one I wouldn't be seen dead in.
Okay.
I think we should.
Suddenly we get to go on then, Percy, and then Danny.
Just thinking, I mean, I used to teach in London in the 1950s, 60s, we're at the same age group. One of the boys, who was a monitor in my science lab, contacted me in December 2012. He's now a grandfather and he was Jewish. Now, the school I taught in didn't have any boundaries on any ethnic minorities, anything like that. But we have these schools in Birmingham and throughout the country, schools which are faith-based and so on. There are Jewish schools.
Yes.
I think that integration of children in one school is far better, because that leads to relationships and not people pointing the fingers at the people because they're perceived to be different.
Well, I didn't go to a Jewish school. I was one of the few Jewish boys in a general school as a minority. So my grandchildren in Birmingham go to the Jewish school around just up the road here, King David School. My daughter is not a religious Jewess any more than her father is a religious Jew. And she lives locally, so to some extent it's supporting home industries. It's local and one thing and another. And she's married a non-Jewish. My son-in-law's not Jewish. We all get on very well, I should say. I don't have any problems whatsoever with him, nor he with me. We're all very good friends. But she somehow, gut reaction was she wanted the children, if possible, to learn from the local school, and that's what happened. Now, she's only one story, and each person like your own, each person will have different stories, and certainly nothing rouses passion much more than things like faith schools, and should they exist or should they not. I don't really have a strong view. I can see the arguments for, I see the arguments against. I think I'm sitting on the fence. That may not help you, but there we go.
Okay, Danny?
I arrived late, as everyone noticed. I missed your talk entirely. I thought you were going to start at 1:45 and last a lot longer, but never mind.
Sorry.
It's all right, no problem. This has been very interesting. Did you at any time talks about the Holocaust?
No, not. My remit when Adrian approached me was to give a background of the Anglo-Jewish history. Now, of course, the impact of the Holocaust on the whole of the Jewish world, and for that matter, a lot of the non-Jewish world, has been immense. And
before you carry on,
sorry?
That wasn't my.
Well, you asked if I had talked about it, and the answer was no, I didn't.
What I'm actually asking is Do you or anyone else give talks about the Holocaust? I'm second generation Jewish survivor.
Oh, I see what you mean.
My mother came over on the kinder transport.
The answer to your question is certainly people do give talks. Unfortunately, in Birmingham, two who used to give the most talks have fairly recently died. One was a man called Paul Oppenheimer, and the other was Magda Bloom. You may or may not. Magda Bloom, by the way, was her husband was a cousin of Adrienne. They used to give talks on the impact of the Holocaust, and unfortunately they've recently died. There probably are others, but I don't know them.
I do know of a lady called Kitty Hart.
Yes.
Who's in fact part of the museum.
Yeah, Kitty Hart.
Museum complex.
Kitty Hart does. Yeah. Yes, that's quite true. She does. I'd forgotten her.
And also Mindu Hornick.
Yeah. Yes.
Mindu, who is still alive. And only last week, or earlier on this week, was the Holocaust Memorial Day.
Yes.
I think it was on Monday, I'm not sure. Now, Mindu Hornick travels the Midlands talking about the Holocaust.
Well, there you go.
Mindu Hornick.
Actually, I was trying to say that I want to find out how I can do more talks because I already do them.
Oh, right. Well,
I can suggest.
Look.
That is to say the Holocaust Centre near Nottingham.
Yeah, Stephen Smith.
We're always looking for volunteers and people who can contribute.
Yeah, that's very good idea.
If you want, at some point, I can give you the. You'll find it on internet.
Right.
Bet Shalom.
Bet Shalom in Nottingham. Right.
But most people, with regard to the information on the Holocaust, are from Holocaust survivors.
Yes.
And this is where people who want to know about the Holocaust get in touch with the survivors, and they are becoming less and less and less.
Which is the reason my second generation survivors.
Yes, but it's personal experience that people have of the Holocaust. And Mindu Hornick is one of the ladies who's still doing this.
Can I ask you just to continue from where you got to?
Sorry, where I got to where? I missed that, sorry.
The impact that the Holocaust had, you were saying it's...
Well, the impact of the Holocaust has been immense because 6 million people, or thereabouts, were slaughtered. Yeah, 6 million Jews. Well, there were a few others as well, gypsies and Romanists and so on.
They are extra to the 6 million.
But 6 million Jews were slaughtered. Inevitably, the numbers of that sort, and slaughtered for the only reason because they were Jewish, is bound to have had an impact. A later impact was when there was ethnic cleansing in Rwanda with all the Hutsis and the Tutus and so on. That wasn't quite the same numbers, but it made a tremendous impact.
Bosnia.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, wherever these things happen, it inevitably has an enormous impact on both on the mental health of the survivors and the host communities, if I may put it that way, who absorb the survivors. The impact is enormous. But it's very difficult to quantify, and I don't have this expertise in this field at all, and I certainly don't have. I didn't have the experience. My family's been in England 300 years. Some of them came a bit later, but none of them. They've all been here since at least the mid-19th century. So I've never had anything personal. The nearest I've ever got to it is visiting Israel and going around Yad Vashem, the memorial to the Holocaust survivors, where the very first time I experienced it, I had no warning about the impact it might have on my own psyche, and there was just a sense of guilt, terrible guilt, that I'd been lucky to be born in England, and all these people hadn't. It's irrational, but I learnt later about the guilt of the survivor. You know, you're in a car crash and the driver's killed, but you got the airbags protects you, that sort of thing. The guilt of the survivor, or displaced survivor, however you like to, is a real phenomenon. But I didn't know anything about it at the time. I learned that later. I'm not an expert in this field at all.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Last night, believe it or not, I was talking to Professor Lord Robert Winston.
I can believe that.
In Nottingham. I was invited to a lecture. My son was involved in it. But he was saying that eugenics had the support of academia in Germany a long time before the war began. And it's that carried on and led to Hitler and the Holocaust, basically.
Well, yes, genetic breeding and the attempt to eradicate unwanted qualities or to only breed wanted qualities, it's not a new idea. you're quite right. It had a profound impact on some European scientists. I think it had an impact on many scientists too, though not with the same approach. I used to know somebody. He's now dead, but I used to know someone who survived the Holocaust. He was in the camp where the Dr. Mengele performed his experiments. In fact, this young boy, as he then was what we call a gopher. He did the errands for Mengele. Possibly survived as a result of being able to carry out these, but his experiences were indescribable, and what he saw was happening to all his friends, relations, and so on. Nevertheless, he survived. He died a few years ago in Israel. When he lived in England, I knew him quite well. He didn't like to talk too much about it, but it was well known that he was Mengele's gopher. But these things can't not have an impact, but I'm not the right person to evaluate them, really. You know, I think you need somebody much more expert than me in this Jewish history, my line.
Well, Stella can have the last question.
Okay.
She had her hand up.
Sort of comments in a way. When mine are always comments. I don't tend to ask questions. But when I visited Auschwitz not that long ago, but I later visited the Imperial War Museum's exhibition on Auschwitz, and I found them both so incredibly appalling, you know, an awful experience to even go around something where there was a model of Auschwitz. And it was interesting, I thought, that there was so much sensitivity involved with that display, because at several points when you were going around the Imperial War Museum's exhibition, there were exits available if you couldn't stand any longer. And I thought that was an absolute example of how Britain is extremely understanding about certain things.
Well, yeah, I'm sure that's true.
And I think the tolerance of things here is underplayed very often, because I remember when I was, and this leads to my second point, I used to be a director on Midlands Today, and I remember that I did a story once with a film crew in King David's School here. And it was, I'm pretty sure, I can't remember the exact details, but I think it was about the fact that there were so many people of other faiths wanting to go to their children to go to that school. Not because of it being necessarily their own faith, obviously, but because it had real structure. And it just made me think tonight, perhaps we misunderstand and make too many assumptions about the reasons for doing anything. It may be that it's not I agree very much with Percy that I prefer open schools where everybody mixes in. But in a way you could say, well, if people aren't actually centering on the religious aspect at King David's School, then perhaps it's the structure that's the most important thing. So I think we do misunderstand a lot of things and put a label on them that is untrue.
Possibly. Again, I'm out of my depth. You need a sociologist and an education expert. All I wanted to do was tell you a little bit about the background of the Anglo-Jewish and the Birmingham Jewish community. And these very difficult questions, one thing is certain, they'll be asking the same questions when you and I are no longer here, and the next generation, nothing will change in that sense. But thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's quite interesting to me the wide range of things
indeed
provoked in people's minds by this evening's talk. So thanks very much for coming, everybody, and have a safe journey home.
Thank you.